Okay. It's my pleasure and our pleasure as consultation to have with us the Reverend Najla Qassab as our speaker for this afternoon in the public lecture. We have announced it to other people outside our circle, but of course this is not a very good time for people to show up at 2:30, but we might still have some people show up. Reverend Najla Qassab is, first of all, a graduate of the Near East School of Theology. We are very proud of her. And she is a pastor in the National Evangelical Synod of Syria and Lebanon. In fact, the second woman to be ordained as pastor in the whole of the Middle East. And she is currently the president of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. And she has been president since 2017. But at the Synod here, at the National Evangelical Synod, she is the director of the Christian Education Department in the Synod. And also to add, she is one of the co-authors of the document We Choose Abundant Life, which we have talked about so much so far. So she will be speaking about the church in the public sphere, and Professor Thomas will give a response later. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Najla Qassab.
Good afternoon. It's good you're here at 2:30. Especially, are there any Orthodox friends around? Because this is a day of celebration for the Orthodox community. Thank you for this opportunity to tackle a valued topic. And I'm sorry I could not attend the consultation with you. I hope that I will not be repeating some of the ideas that were mentioned in the consultation. It's a valued topic that challenges the church in Germany and in the Middle East. This topic has become an urgent need as the Middle East faces new geopolitical changes besides the economic crisis that both Lebanon and Syria face today. It's a high time for the church to reflect on how the church perceives its presence, impact, role, and identity. How to be the church for today, how to be the church in the public sphere, where the church provides theologically based contributions to public discourse, striving to secure a healthy relationship between religious communities and the secular public. The question is strongly posed by the younger generation, who feel that the church falls from meeting their aspiration and at least does not tackle their life questions that they face daily in their life. Younger generations struggle with how they deal with issues they face between Monday and Saturday. How the church can be credible, substantive, and influential institution beyond the walls of the church is a key question that is posed on the churches in the Middle East and worldwide. How can the church impact the discussion in the society and dares to tackle issues faced in the public sphere and participate with integrity? I think the church can participate, but how to participate with integrity in discussion and work towards a better tomorrow for all in the wider context, so that all may have life and have it abundantly. I would like to clarify the term public sphere as a body of private persons assembled to discuss matters of public concern or common interest, as Jürgen Habermas describes it. It's a metaphor for thinking of how information and ideas circulate in society. It's where people come to agreement or consensus about common issues and decide what to do in the future. It's characterized by rational critical discourse and wide participation. One cannot admit that there is more than one public sphere, but there are multiple public spheres. The public sphere is different from merely market and state. It's a free space or room for the citizens to flourish and to work together towards the better future as citizens. It's the space, the common space for all, where citizens can freely discuss and they commit themselves to voluntarily associative forms and improve and control the various levels for the common life. In a panel that I attended lately online, the well-known journalist, Mr. Rami Khouri, a professor of journalism at AUB, claims we never have a public sphere in the Arab world. It never existed. The political authorities, or the religious, or the tribal, or ideological authorities control power in our region in the modern period, starting from the late 40s. They control our minds, guided by power structure. What we think in private and public is controlled, and I'm still quoting Rami. The most important need in the Arab world, and I guess in Lebanon and Syria, as he states, is freedom of expression. There is regression in freedom space of expression, freely and openly. People are put in jail because of the way they think. And we have seen this in Egypt, in Lebanon, and many countries in Syria, and many countries around. Rami describes the general Middle Eastern context as autocratic, family-run, foreign-supported Arab governance combined with foreign governance supported by modern technology. The Middle East is led, according to Rami, by authoritarian digital autocrats. The power structures try to turn citizens as sheep. There might be some activists who work towards justice, opportunity, equity, but till now there is no more clear space or invitation for citizens to participate with ideas in fixing the society. The general setting, according to Rami, is controlled. So to speak about the public sphere is to have freedom of expression, where people are not controlled by fear or what will happen to them if they speak bluntly about issues and points of injustice. I believe this general milieu does affect the involvement of the church in the public sphere. The question that Mr. Khouri proposes regarding public spheres looks pessimistic, but I think it's a valid observation, and we wonder whether we are invited to such spaces. I wonder if our countries do invite us for such spaces. Besides, the question of freedom of expression is an important element on the journey for such involvement. So what I will try to present is why churches are not really involved in the public sphere in a direct, strong way. And I think the issue of freedom of expression affects the participation of the churches in the public sphere. So this is one factor that I agree, you know. Even in Lebanon, we might have more freedom for expression, but still, in general, this freedom of expression is a prerequisite for a dialogue and for moving forward and being, participate in changing, dealing with the public sphere and moving towards the common good for all. Another factor that affects the church involvement in the public sphere is the church's self-understanding of its identity and mission. And this is the starting point, whether the church is involved or not, depends on how the church sees her identity. How the church that understands its mission and involvement in the society is crucial. As president of the World Communion of Reformed Churches, as I work through the theme called to communion, committed to justice, as I visit the churches around the communion, I discover the difficulty churches face in perceiving justice work as central to our faith. Seeing our involvement with the common good for all as an expression of spirituality. Many churches don't see that it's related to spirituality. They see it more like activism, social activism. I believe the bridge between our faith and involvement in the public sphere is not clear among many churches in the Middle East. Even some judge the church that is socially active as less spiritual and is worldly. Unless we bridge well between our identity as churches and involvement in working towards the common good for all, churches do not see their role as essential to their faith and mission. So many churches might feel like, why should I be involved in the public sphere? And unless this is central to the way I see my faith related to the public sphere, unless the churches are combine this faith with this reach out to the society, I think churches with this understanding for their identity will not be motivated towards working with the public sphere. I remember a youth in our church who was very active in conferences, and he would participate in every synod meeting. Suddenly, I stopped seeing him in conferences. So I asked about him and tried to know where he is. And at the end, I found that he is involved with Bishop Gregoire Haddad, who used to be known as the Bishop of the Poor. And he was very much involved as an activist in the civil society. This young man, who was a very committed Christian, is now a well-known journalist, poet, and politician who could not understand his faith in isolation, but rather decided that his faith should be bridged to the public, even when that meant taking risks. He is a bold thinker, and he was trying to run for elections, but changed his mind in this time. And he looks, he is well-known, but he is sometimes too radical. This young man saw his faith, the need of this faith to be lived in the public sphere, not in isolation in that. Another story reminds me of the piano teacher of our children, who's a Catholic priest, who decided during the demonstrations against corruption to speak against corruption in the public sphere. He had the courage to join the demonstration and carry a garbage bag and throw it on the Parliament building, with the media taking the picture. He struggled with his church leaders because he dared to allow his faith to tackle public issues. I believe he's still paying the price for that act till now. Lately, I was in Armenia, speaking to a group of women from the Arab world, mainly from conservative evangelical churches. It was hard to change their minds that to be holy is not to live in isolation, but to be involved publicly, sharing your faith on the streets for the dignity of the people. There is a general perception in the churches in the Middle East that church is called to be compassionate for the needs of the people, but not to be involved directly with the civil society. Many see working towards the common good not linked to the role of the church, and thus they are not present whether in political spheres or any involvement in direct civil engagement. In following up on church discussion in public sphere, some talked about, while I was going through the websites of the churches in the region to see what they have done, talked about public sphere. Many use the word church and public sphere, not church in the public sphere, because it's as if it's too isolated. It's a topic that the church should not be directly involved in. For example, I'm a woman who has been working with women since 1990 for change in the church. I never worked with women in the civil society. And I always say, how come I care about women and I'm not involved with the women in the civil society? Lately I had a, this is the question that affects how does the church see its identity, affects its involvement in the public sphere. And I'm afraid that some churches have drawn the lines and lived their spirituality in isolation. Lately, I had the chance to be part of a group of theologians and civil society, social activists from the Middle East who met on Zoom during COVID for almost 1 year, working towards contextual theology and tackling concerns of the church in the Middle East. The document that you already know, We Choose Abundant Life, was the fruit of such discussion. And I am sure that many have read this document, and Dr. Thuraya told me yesterday that many have seen that document. And I will be sharing some of the ideas that we discussed and are present in that document. One of the issues that affects the church involvement in the public sphere is the issue of role crisis and minority complex. I wonder if Thuraya spent time talking about that, because that affects the church's role in public sphere. Today, the role of the church in the Middle East is affected by the decrease in number of Christians in Lebanon and Syria. Many Christians in the Middle East live under the pressure of what might be called a role crisis. Most of them did not understand, to see the identity. What role do we have? Because they linked it to the, decrease in number. So it affected that they see that we are becoming smaller in number, and that have created a crisis in the way they look at themselves as minority. And I think this is, it leads people to retrieve from a serious role in society. And also, they have a challenge about how do they see their role as Christians today. The document says, Christians, therefore, are invited not to understand themselves just as a number, as a minority, but as a group of citizens, men and women, who together with others contribute to the common good through the multiple roles they play. In the first place, and individuals, without insisting on owning those roles or claiming a monopoly on them. So the role of the Christians or the churches in their involvement in the public sphere is affected by the way they look at themselves. If we look at ourselves as a minority, that many times we find ourselves as a weak minority. I think we are called to look at ourselves as citizens who are involved in the public sphere and who can make a difference about it. This is why the document, We Choose Abundant Life, calls for deconstructing a minority complex in which internal and external protection is invoked. Christians should not stumble in the search of positions of influence, the document says, depicting the other as a source of fear. That would destroy the essence and the depth of their choices as they were revealed in their history. Before, the Christians had a great role, but now we find that Christians are worried about their role. They don't have the confidence as before about what the change they can bring to this area. Christians in the Middle East are required, along with Muslim brothers and sisters and other partners, to delve deep into building a civil state. And the document talks a lot about that, where citizenship can be applied without discrimination or exception. It's, above all, a challenge to build a modern and constitutional state that can provide a model for managing diversity and remains equidistant from all religions. How, we look at ourselves as a minority, how we understand the strength of our role as individuals, and the role that we play affects our participation in the common good and in the public sphere. So we are called to work, as individuals and to be involved in working towards a civil state where every, within this diverse context, everyone have their rights in that. The fourth issue, why churches do not really feel motivated in working in the public sphere, is that the challenge of social media with hidden agendas. The church today in the Middle East, if we want to work in the public sphere, we cannot but think of media. The church cannot be available in the public sphere without using social media as a tool for discourse and sharing opinion and shaping the thought in society. One of the main concerns that impacts the role of the church in the public sphere conversation is the fear that media is mostly run by business. And this is where people worry about the way we use media and commercial interests. They try to shape public opinion for their own end rather than thinking objectively about issues. So this is why to use the media is a risky ground that churches sometimes worry about how they can use it on their journey towards making change in the public sphere. The church is cautious about the hidden agendas that media could bring, which could lead to raising issues, but never to providing solutions to problems in the public sphere. So yes, media an important tool, but at the same time, it's a risky tool. It's a tool that could raise issues, but does not necessarily find solutions. And this is why the church, is cautious about the way media is used in this perspective. Such media has played an active role in the uprisings that we saw in the Middle East. For example, in Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, and later in Iraq and Lebanon, documenting the popular movements and spreading news relating to citizens' rights that have been violated. And this media has a great role in showing the needs that we need to work towards in the public sphere. Still, the media, with all its ability to open the door for discussion and a possible tool for cutting edge between private and public, it did not bring change. How can cyberspace be a space for change is a key concern that we need to take seriously, knowing, despite the fact that it can open unprecedented horizons, it's not immune from creating confusion. So yes, media is a vital and important part in how we try to change the thinking in the public sphere, but it's a risky ground as well. And this is why churches are hesitant in the way they deal with media. In the document, We Choose Abundant Life, the document calls churches to give utmost priority to media and communication in terms of vision, policies, and technologies when mainstreaming their values, especially when it comes to living together with respect for diversity. So yes, it can be used. This is why the document calls urgently to develop a joint ecumenical action plan for media that would encourage a professional discourse in the service of mission and foster human dignity, speaking to both mind and heart, and free from rigid tradition, fake piety, and apologetic debate. So yes, media is needed, and this is why I think this is a priority of the ecumenical world, the churches to join hands and try to work together into a media that can project their values. And I want to repeat, yes, we want to be involved, but with integrity, with our values as a church. And how I know many people feel excited if they are on TV, or they are used. But at the end, the question is, what are they conveying? What values are we conveying to create change in the public sphere? So yes, the challenge of social media and hidden agendas is one factor that makes the church worried about its involvement in the public sphere. Number 5, there's great discouragement to work in the public sphere due to failure of movements that have not moved forward. The best example of expression in encountering dealing with the public sphere was depicted in 17th of October, 2019. Protests taking place in Lebanon. In these protests, they triggered, that were triggered at the beginning by a decision to add the fees for WhatsApp and other areas. But it quickly expanded in the country, and it was condemning sectarian rule, stagnation of the economy, unemployment, corruption in the public sector, legislation that was perceived to shield the ruling class from accountability and failures. This uprising, and many of us remember that, it created this new hope of real involvement in the public sphere. The Lebanese uprising triggered the young people who were looking forward to radical political and social change. The uprising carried a considerable potential for change, even though in some countries they were accused. Yet this potential may have been one of the main reasons that drove dominant political forces, the usual beneficiaries of the status quo, to try to silence these movements. The uprising was a starting point, and I think this is a story that the Lebanese will not forget. In this time of the uprising, there was this hope of change, and the young Christians and Muslims were involved, men and women were involved, and there was this move of even the church thinking about how we can do change. This uprising was a starting point for new ways of looking at the relationship between citizenship and other elements of identity, such as religion, confession, race, color, based on citizenship as an umbrella that acknowledges, embraces, and respects differences. Despite what happened, these protests and what the young call it revolution, although they were an important move, they did not do any change so far towards democratic political system in Lebanon or in other parts of the Middle East. This experience has discouraged the young people in their involvement, because there was this move about real involvement in the public sphere, change, the common good for all, and then the young people discovered that year after year, this uprising did not bring any fruits in that. I remember my son-in-law, who is a Baptist youth leader, he started at that time to hold meetings for the young people in the downtown, in a tent, where the youth would meet and they will speak about public issues. That created, even with this church, this group of young people started to think how their faith will be lived beyond the church, how their faith would tackle the issues of better life for all in that. The uprising brought a new thinking to the young, but it did not lead to real change that the young people aspired to. It was one step towards the common good, where youth from different regions voiced their concern, but still had no consensus on moving forward and fulfilling change. One person put it that these revolutions are not totally dead. They are in the intensive care unit. There is slight breath, but till now they did not bring change in that. The failure of fulfilling change till now discourages the involvement of the church in the public sphere. Unfortunately, till now, people feel like, oh, so I speak up for what? And I'm worried to say that till now there isn't this assurance that we can bring change in that. And this experience that happened in the uprising have created this discouragement among the young people and I think this failure so far discourages the church from its involvement in the public sphere. Last is that sometimes the church doesn't get involved the way that it should in the public sphere because they are afraid from fragmentation within the church. Because not everybody stands on the same way of thinking about issues in the public sphere. And so this is also one factor that keeps the church, behind in moving forward and strongly in being involved in the public sphere. I go now to, after mentioning why the churches are not involved the way they should, I would like to now tackle the issue, what does the Reformed Church, or what do our church bring now to the work, to the thinking around the public sphere? I believe that the Reformed Church in the Middle East has something to present in this field. I believe that we remain more or less a democratic structure where it allows discussion in taking decisions in the life of the church. And authority is shared through committees in non-hierarchical structures. The Reformed Church is a paradigm where its members grow in a milieu where discussion is central. To be in our churches, discussion is key. And people have the right to express their minds. Principally, no one church leader has the right to control the thinking of any member. Laity are heard and have the right in leading the discussion and the decision in the church. This is something, as a Reformed church, I think the way we see ourselves as more of a democratic structure, we can contribute to this journey of moving towards the public sphere. Despite the fact that some people do not live to this level, I know not every church is democratic, not every Protestant or evangelical church is democratic, and some mistakes happen. But the church governance model remains a democratic paradigm. When we think of involvement in the public sphere, democracy, dialogue, non-hierarchical structures, freedom of expression, I believe these elements are prerequisite for moving forward to be involved in the public sphere. I believe as a church we have good basic elements for encouraging dialogue and involvement in the public sphere. So yes, as churches, as Reformed, I think there's something we can present in this journey on moving towards the public sphere. Also as evangelical community, and I mean here not only Protestants, the Baptists and the other evangelical churches, we are raised as a church with diversity. To be evangelical in this part of the world, it means to be diverse, where we grow to accept different interpretations and even practices and theologies. Different churches in the evangelical family gather under the same umbrella as evangelicals. This diversity helps us to accept differences, to work towards the common good in multi-religious society, accepting diversity and striving to be in the shoes of others. This helps in working together towards a better tomorrow through the eyes of those who are different. I think this is one of the issues that we contribute to the area, is that we live in diversity, we are a diverse community, we accept difference. And I know this matter bothers our other churches. It's hard for them to understand this diversity. But I think this is a situation that can help in dealing with this move towards working in the public sphere. So yes, we grow thinking with diversity as Reformed and evangelicals, and at the same time, this identity can be helpful in the discussion outside. Also, as a church, historically, we had a great value in educating women. The Protestant church was the first to teach women in the whole Ottoman Empire. Our concern for the common good for women was at the heart of our move towards better life for all. Teaching women shaped the society. And as one politician told me one time, that Protestants should lead in the public sphere regarding equality for women, whether in political and social. Historically, we have this special role that we played, and I believe this is a role that we need to continue to play. We are proud. We are the first church that ordained 4 women as pastors till now, and this is a new move in the Middle East, and we hope that we can lead in the political sphere as well, where the situation of women in Lebanon is embarrassing in that. Also, educational ministry that we have, the schools that we have as Protestants is an important platform that shapes minds to think critically, teaching students from different religious backgrounds, preparing the ground for citizens who think in terms of accepting difference and reaching for the common good. The schools are a very important ministry that we have, where there is lots of shaping for a generation that can think in terms of public good, the public sphere, and work for the common good. Educating a generation that's critical is very important. Also, last point, the whole concept of continual reformation. I want to say that as a church who is always challenged to keep scrutinizing its life in the light of the gospel and to continue living the Reformation, where we are called to continually reevaluate our practices and try to live our faith in the now under the direction of the work of the Holy Spirit. As a church, we are not scared from change. And I want to say this is a wonderful trait that we grow with, but rather focus on the other, and we are ready to change for the sake of the other, the different. This is why our role in the region as serving the others through schools, orphanages, hospitals, university is vital. Serving all, no matter who they are, from other religions or colors or class. As a small group in number, I believe our history, we are able to share, to work towards the common good for all through these services, and I hope that we move forward. Finally, I want to confess that this road is not easy. The topic is interesting, but it's not an easy topic, spending some time thinking about it. The church in Lebanon and Syria is occupied in preserving the dignity of the people. With the sudden collapse in Lebanon and war in Syria and the economic war in Lebanon and Syria, we are not given the space to think in openness, serenity, and cooperation. I want to say we don't have this luxury. The continual wars that we have been facing, one after the other, has burdened our thinking and body, and hopefully not our souls. To work towards the common good is urgent. We need to continue to be a bridge for dialogue, where we do not wait to be invited for the public sphere, but to try to initiate the needed space for dialogue and change, and have the courage to sit around difficult tables. Yes, the wars that we have been through has hindered this strong move for change in that. I think we want to be involved in the public sphere. And still, we want to work a lot on shaping theologically our thinking. And I think part of this meeting is how can we really theologically contribute to the public sphere. Will such involvement divide our churches? This is a challenge. In a polarized society, how would our stand remain prophetic? Working with the public sphere in a mindset and working with the civil society is essential. I want to say one of the main roles that we have to focus at as a church is working with the civil society. This bridging efforts, that we can move for a better tomorrow. I believe taking risks remain better than silence. and withdrawal. This is why, yes, challenges are many, but I believe as a church we are called to take risks in that. We have to set a model as a church in our life as a community for healthy dialogue in order to impact others. If we want to move into dialogue with others outside, you know, as a church, we have to live it at home and have a healthy dialogue within our churches so that we can impact the common good for everybody. I would like to close with some words from the Wittenberg Witness. It's a document that was signed between the World Communion of Reformed Churches and the Lutheran Church. It says, together we long for renewed imagination of what being the church for the world could mean. We need new imagination to live together in ways that would embrace our unity, not only as a gift, but as a calling. We need new imagination to dream of a different world, a world where justice, peace, and reconciliation prevail. We need new imagination to practice spiritualities of resistance and prophetic vision, spiritualities in the service of life, spiritualities formed by the mission of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Najla. To respond briefly is Professor Dr. Günther Thomas. For those who came from outside and don't know him, he is the chair for systematic theology and ethics at the Protestant Theological Faculty in the Ruhr University, Bochum in Germany. Dr. Thomas.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I checked the double task of following and responding at the same time. Well, you represent so much experience of the Middle East and of the churches that I don't know where to start. What I would like to do now with just some broad brush strokes, single out some possible fields of discussion. So it's more a suggestion on where we might discuss. First of all, our first point is I think we should make a very clear distinction between, and that's a kind of ideal type construction. It's a type of kind of ideal type construction. Are we talking about a democracy, a somehow working democracy with a somehow working legal system? Or are we talking about public theology in a system where we have not a somehow really working democracy? Because it depends. Do we have a public space? And I think over the whole course of the workshop, and now even more when you presented it, we do have a chicken-egg problem. In some way, we need what is our goal. The presupposition is what we have as our goal. So we need a chicken, but the chicken gives the egg, and you know the problem. So we do have a question, is there a public sphere? And in a way, I think your journalist was right, there is no public sphere. How do we get there? We might have a vision of a public sphere, that's quite nice and valuable and responsible and so on and so on. But the question is, how do we get there? It can be quite irresponsible just to have dreams. And I think we need to make a distinction between the work for the public sphere and the work in the public sphere. And I'm deeply convinced that, and your examples are wonderful, that the churches need to be spaces where work for the public sphere is done. Actually, where in software development, it's the so-called sandbox, not the playground sandbox, but the sandbox where you actually test the software, where you actually run it. Not in the reality, yes, somehow in reality, because it has to work, but not with the customer. Churches are, I think, sandboxes where you run and test and develop competences to enable people to become responsible people in a public sphere that is emerging. So the sandbox is the best help to help an emerging public. So you know there is now, I'm running a little bit counter to what you said, because maybe it's not the task for the church to go into the public, but to train people and to have exemplary models, spaces, for instance, like in East Germany before the revolution, round tables. The round tables, the counter-public, where the public sphere was missing, was created inside the churches, created with radical hospitality in the churches, where you invite all those who are concerned about the future of your polis. I think that's the first step. And it might be an interesting example, because what you presented was a kind of paradox. You have a religiously overpopulated political space. And now you call the churches have to go public. I would say no, don't have to be public. They have to withdraw from the public. But they practice, or they should practice, that's my idea now, yeah, or my suggestion. We don't need a public theology, we need a subversive theology. Subversive in terms of the power structures in the church, subversive to create the sandbox space where people are acknowledged, where the plurality can be tested, a space where the government does not have so much access like on the demonstrations. And there, I think something can be developed that is then transported to larger publics. But you need a starting point. So maybe we should think that not the churches, but Christians should go public, work in the public. And for the hardcore theologians among you, that's an old issue. You are Reformed. Most of public theology is Reformed, only a little bit Lutheran. Because the Lutheran model was we transform the world by means of Christians. And there is no law for the church, there's plurality. The Reformed churches said, tertius usus legis, what you had to train for the exams. Yes, that's present. The church, as church, has to impose the law of love onto itself and then to the public. So there is, in the whole public theology debate, a little bit of an understream of an old conflict between Reformed and Lutheran. And what I'm arguing for is a little bit, well, there is a truth in the Lutheran position. You train people who are then responsible in the public. And maybe you should really withdraw as church from the public and act as Christians. In an religiously overpopulated political space. It's just an idea. I throw it and we might discuss it, and I would like to have your response on that. And then transmission belts. Transmission belts are important when you go on the street. What can we, the activists, they commit, I think, a mistake, a very severe mistake. They assume that in modern complex societies, and also dictatorships are pretty complex, the protest on the street can change anything. It can only cause irritation. Irritation, not more. It can irritate the political system, it can irritate politics, it can irritate. But it does not have very much of a vector. So I'm sorry for being so blunt. The disappointment of the youth that went on the street and thought that it can change with the demonstration something. This frustration is produced by those people who misled them and created false hopes. You can never change a modern society just on the streets. You need transmission belts so that the law can react, that the political system can react in a certain direction. So I think it's very dangerous, public theology. It can mislead people and lead them into disappointment. And then transmission belt, and they need to be nourished. It was very complicated. If we look, for instance, at the East Germany transition, you need the power on the street, sure, but you need insiders in the legal system then who have the courage to take up the irritation for transformation. So the question is, how do we get the irritation to a direction into more democracy? Because smart dictators become even more repressive after every type of protest on the street. And that's also worldwide the experience. They become even smarter to reject the rebellion. Okay, so the idea is the transmission belts, and that's hard work. Trust, personal connections, legal things, international laws. There's a lot of work done to be on these transmission belts. Then the use of media. It's very tricky. I mean, our media are also very much in an economy of attention, because even our public media, they broadcast the things there where they can, and that's the logic of media, even our public media. You broadcast something combined with advertisement, and the broadcasters sell the collected attention to the companies who want to sell goods. And you and I and you, we all pay what we cannot pay with cash, with our attention. That's the point of advertising. It's nice that we don't have advertising here. So it's very risky, and so I would really say we need in the church have a two-step approach. One is, yes, we need to see how can we connect, how we can create communities, imagine communities, how can we have more impact, how can we work against the inferiority complex by use of media in the church. And I would like to see a worship where we worship together with a community here. You know, I mean, we have to develop very boldly the media connectivity. It's a resource for the ecumenical spirit. When Paul was saying, I'm writing you a letter and I would like to be there, we today have to say we use the digital media and we would like to be there, and maybe we should not be there because of the CO2 imprint. So this is one thing. The other thing, do we have the resources to enter the highly competitive professional media space? And do we want to go into the logic then? It has to be sexy, actual, current, emotional, and so on and so on. That's the tricky question. And I have to admit, I mean, we have some experts of the EKD here. Even the German church raised the white flag. We still have a little bit in the media, and we have broadcast services, but we closed the journalism school because we were running out of money. And the impact, how to influence really the media, we have to be very modest and cautious. Yeah. So there might be fascinating things, but we should boldly use the media for interconnectivity and raise the impact of the church. So what do we do with the media? That's I think an open question, and then I'm basically subversive theology, yes, round tables. That's the kind of, and we should be reminded, the evolution in the Iran, the revolution, started by low-tech technology, by cassettes, spreading information. And all revolutions and transformations started in physical presence communities. Without the physical presence in East Germany, in the churches, the round tables and the worships, it would have not there would not have been a revolution. So we should not underestimate the subversive power by ideas, by people, by sandboxes, by networking, to have a long stretch view on transforming and building a civil society. So that's more a supplement. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will take a couple of questions or comments and then ask them to come and answer rather than immediately one by one. So there is a wireless mic here, and just pass it on from one speaker to the other. Who would like to start? We'll start here since it's the closest. Joffin. We'll take maybe 3 or 4 questions first.
Hi, Dr. Najla. Reverend question.
So-called revolution. We wanted to meet in a decent place, not on the street. So we asked the university, I was part of the group, if they can give us a hall to have a dialogue. They agreed. And the night they called us, we cancelled because we received a call from the security intelligence agents that we were forbidden to hold such meetings at university halls. But it was a very intense period, maybe. Another experience with a group, with a research company, but I sense that it is affiliated with a church background, that under the theme of facilitation, facilitating a dialogue between different political movements, new and old, they were able to gather these political groups in form of dialogues, and their role is only facilitation. So it was like a great role in a certain time, and they were able to do that perfectly without any interruption. I'm sharing these 2 examples just as a fuel of thoughts, what can work and what cannot work. Thank you.
Just pass it on to Tinka.
Thank you very much for both of your statements. My question is there enough time left? Both of you somehow suggested a kind of solution which takes time, working in the civil society, but also having a subversive theology. But what I've heard now, being in Lebanon for some days, is that there is this brain drain, and that the people who are very well educated, that they just leave. Those people who are urgently needed by impacting in a positive way. So is there still enough time, or are there still enough people left to have impact?
And you are addressing it to both.
Both, yes, thank you.
I will take 2 more questions. Uwe? Giro, did you want to say? Go ahead. So speak first.
First, to Professor Gunther, when he used the term subversive, another definition of subversive is troublemaker. And usually in the Middle East, the churches teach their congregations not to be troublemakers, to be more pious, to be more gentle, to be more kind, to be more docile, sweet, and so on. So what is your take on this, if this is the, let's say, the inner education of the church? And a question for Reverend Najla. When we say we will go to the public sphere from the church and in the church, don't you also think that the church should encourage its members who have political aspirations, who have maybe design aspirations? Not everybody is a theologian. Some people want to go into political science, to social science, into psychology, And this is also a way to encourage them to go to the public sphere and be Christians. So,
thank you so much. I have to admit that I'm very much moved personally by your lecture. Of course, the last time we held this international consultation here in Beirut was 6 years ago. And I was sitting on a panel and I asked from the panel, when are you going to have your first ordained women? And I was approached by a few people afterwards. One said that I have spoiled the good mood of some people, and one pastor even approached me and told me that I have no intercultural sensitivity to ask such a question in public. You can only do that between two people, but not in public, and so on. And I feel bad, and now you're standing here. As the president of the World Federation of Reformed Churches, not just as a pastor, but also as an ordained pastor. What I would like to ask is, do you already see an impact, how the public sphere has been changed, has been transformed by the women pastors you have? Is there already something visible, or would it be too early to ask this question?
Keep it with you for a while. Keep it with you. Who would like to start?
I can start with this question. I'll answer you after 4 years. Thank you for all the comments that were said. And yes, Owen, you know, the church is in the hands of God at the end. So I think with all the struggles that we are in, God is at work with the church through the ordination of women. And lately, just be having a woman ordained in Syria is on media. I was impressed how much the Syrian television has taken this issue. Yes. So at the end, yes, we don't know the time, and God surprises us. And I want to say we're proud as a church that we are moving forward, you know, and God is using women in a special way. The impact of women pastors, Lima's here, she can help me. I want to say at least to present a different paradigm of leadership. That changes the way women, you know, do their ministry in the church. For sure, ordaining women is not a solution. It's starting a new journey about changing minds of women in leadership. You know, as World Community of Reformed Churches, we have now we're working towards a Women Leaders Summit around the Reformed family to share the concerns about how we can, you know, really impact the churches and impact society in that. I want to say, through the ordination of women, and I'm very much involved in the Catholic Church. I'm on the committee in Turkey working towards a synod to women in the Catholic Church. And I'm impressed that the way they receive our role as women as something that they want to look at as a challenge to them as churches as well. We are a committee working of Orthodox, Protestant, men and women working towards the synod. And it seems God is at work in other churches. I'm surprised, and I always say, you know, I might create problems for you coming with my color. And they say, no, you have to come the way you are. And things are moving. At the end, the church is in the hands of God and the Holy Spirit who works through change. And I believe we have lost a lot in the Middle East, but we didn't lose the spirit of the Holy Spirit working through the churches in that. So yes, I believe women will impact the future of the churches if they have the right support and the right breath to keep working on change in that. Concerning, do we have enough time? Thank you. Because I always challenge the communion on that. We work on justice. And sometimes we work on justice as if we have all the time. The element of time is very important, especially in the Middle East, you know. Yes, things are changing, and this is why, as churches, we need to take it seriously, you know, and to present practical solutions, you know, about this. The time is not, you know, we don't have much time, and I hope in all our work we should have this motto as we work, that we have to move fast in preserving the young people of the Middle East and doing changes. Concerning the media, you know, here, if you want to come, for example, if you want to be use one of the important TV channels, unless you say what they like, they will not host you. And this is why we need a media, and I wish we had enough resources. This is the difference between Germany. We don't have resources. Media is very expensive. We don't have resources. But I believe the church worldwide should join hands on the issue of media, because this is the best tool to change the dialogue, you know. This is where cooperation should happen strongly in media. Locally in Lebanon, you know, media is controlled, you know, big TVs, or if you say what they want, they will host you, you know. For example, I was thinking of the elections. Where is the church in the elections today? May 15 is the elections. What did the church do? Did you hear any sermon on elections? I heard one at Easter, the pastor saying, "Elected Jesus." But you know, where is it? Yeah, he's not running. But you know, it's just, I always say, you know, we're talking about public. I mean, how real are we as churches? How real are we? Where are we in the elections? Nobody, you know, we're worried because sometimes we have two people running from the same church, so you don't want headache in the church. But really, where are we in what's happening around us? Even in our preaching, even in our discussions, you know. So this is where, you know, we have to move. The political sphere. Yes, there are some political people who have political aspirations in our churches. I don't see that churches encourage them. You know, we have one pastor from the Baptist church who ran as a parliamentary member, and he's running again. And I remember how many people were against, you know, this, they were against. We don't know how to deal with politics as churches in Lebanon. Probably the situation in Germany is different. I feel in Germany that the church is heard more by politicians than it is in our context. I mean, we are in some way, we keep a safe distance. We don't talk, we hear lots of politics, we do our own thinking, but we don't go into dialogues about political issues in the church. Is there any event happening today? I remember one time in the Baptist seminary, they invited some of the candidates to listen to their agendas who were running. But now I don't hear of anything happening. If we want change, we cannot be apolitical as a church. You know, and I always struggle with the word communion. I mean, we work for justice, but we don't want to work politics. I mean, we have to have a dialogue in that. Round tables, I don't see much round tables. Yesterday, a Swiss delegation asked me if we have regular round tables with our Muslim brothers and sisters. And I said, I don't see this happening. We probably have some conferences together, but we don't have regular round tables. And I hope, this is what I mentioned, our hands is full with, you know, focusing on feeding the people. It has taken so much of our energy. I hope that we move into churches that do change from inside, to have round tables within the church that meet regularly, to think objectively about, to be enriched, the Muslims and Christians, about what will happen, how we can really change the mind outside. I know that there are many who are willing to do that, but there isn't serious organized round tables that meet regularly. And probably this is something that's needed to think together on that. There are some seminars that happen on and off, but not it's same group meeting regularly. I I know the leaders of the churches here and the Muslim groups. Every now and then there is a conference, they are on media, and that's it. And I wonder, why don't these leaders meet regularly and take some of these issues, take one issue that they can work on that. I think we are behind on that. I think if you want to add something to this, I don't want to take all the time.
I think it's not a project to have docile church members and pacify everything. But it's a it can be a very bold reminder that people live in spaces of responsibility as Christians. And in a way, the New Testament is tricky at that point, that the family is a space of responsibility is for most Christians pretty clear. That their own life might be in space of responsibility, that's in the modern individualistic area very self-evident. And what are the other spaces? The profession, the city, another tricky thing is the nation. And when we talk about citizenship, I get the impression that in the last couple of days we oscillate between a kind of citizenship of being human and free in a society. But in Germany we debate what's the distinction between Bürgerrechte and Menschenrechte, citizen rights and human rights. Because Bürgerrechte, citizen rights, are always rights of a nation. And if you want to transform your larger environment, you cannot just work top-down from the UN or from humanity. So what's one of the open questions I take with me here is citizenship of what? And then it's getting muddy. But I think it's a spiritual, it's a minefield theologically and historically, if I say this as a German. But I think it's a spiritual challenge to communicate in the church that this church has, or this particular church has a task in this nation. This is a space of responsibility because the democracy has to be developed here. Turkey and Egypt is not your country. Now, last thing, with the paradox we are struggling. What do you mean when you talk about church? Because it's a paradox. You want to have citizenship and the church in the public. Well, then you will never have citizenship when the church is in public. What does it mean that the church is in public? Maybe it's good that the church is not, ideally speaking, is not as church saying, vote for this and this. But you have thousands of responsible disciples who are at the same time citizens and take up responsibility, connect, discuss, sure, have a space to discuss it, to debate it, to get to the nuts and bolts of a certain party and so on. And look and make yourself the other accountable. So when I talk about citizenship, it's not individualism. We have to make ourselves mutually accountable, give reasons. So then you have the sandbox debate. And then you go and people vote, not according to the church recommendation, but according to their competence as disciples and citizens. The timing question is a very depressing one, an honest one. We have many issues where we have the feeling, even our societies, time is running out. And then I think the only alternative is depression, or you can go for Maoism. Impose the good life regardless of the victims. Or you look for encouraging models, parables that keep people encouraged on the long way, walking under the dark clouds, where they have the feeling that they are running out. And that's, I think, This encouraging models, this can be persons, this can be projects, this can be initiatives. These encouraging models, this is the way of the consolation of the Spirit on a way that is pretty bumpy. And we have to be bold to have the models. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two questions. Dr. Awad, anybody else? Final question then. You wanted to say something? No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just for the question that Gio raised about subversive, I don't know how that term is in Armenian or is it used in Armenian. But subversive is a very important word, and I think, let me call it, it's a theological word, because this whole talk about the coming reign of God, the coming kingdom of God, is nothing but subverting the kingdoms of the world. The gospel is a subverting element to the news of the world. So it's a very important word, and I think it has a theological meaning. And I think it's not defined well. We need to work on defining it. Thank you, Professor Thomas, for setting the discussion on track with regard to the church and public sphere, and for placing the church relationship to the public sphere in the for and not in. I think this is a very important remark that is worth continuing to discuss. It's very important because there's a lot of confusion about public sphere, the church, its enrollment, and all that. And I think you put the finger on something very important. So this is well taken, and I think it's very important remark. Reverend Assad, thank you for your lecture, and thank you for the last points that you mentioned about how Reformed witness in this part of the world, due to the identity of the Reformed Church, can become a better witness in the world. And I think this is important. And I have raised this question about the role of the Reformed Church in this part of the world several times with pastors and church officials in Presbyterian circles, seeking what is our future role in this part of the world. And of course, historically, you mentioned education was a pillar in Reformed presence here. But we can continue with the education, but it's no longer the trademark of Reformed presence. And I think if we want to be a church for the public sphere, there are at least two areas I think of utmost importance to get involved with. Through round tables, creating a space, a sphere for conversation, for dialogue, for interaction, for engagement, for fighting, for whatever we want to call it. Two important for this context. One, the Reformed Church to be a facilitator of reconciliation and peacemaking. This culture is based on hatred. It is based on enmities, on conflicts. Can the church be a peacemaker? Can the church dedicate all the resources it has, all the resources, financial and other resources, to become a bridge, a peacemaker in a culture that is divided, in a culture that lives in enmity with itself, become a vehicle of reconciliation between Muslims and Muslims, between Christians and Christians, between Protestants and other Protestants, number one. Number two, involvement in environmental issues. This is a very important stewardship that no one has picked up as a church. And I think it is very important if the Protestant church can associate itself with this stewardship for the world. Thank you.